Evening and a very early morning and actually pretty nice plane ride back. Here we stand. This was a pretty remarkable week by any standard when you consider that I was at the White House, spoke with President Biden at length over a number of issues, and then we went outside while he signed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure plan that I think we all agree was long overdue for the nation. And I thought it was bipartisan in the sense that 19 Republicans in the Senate had voted for it, and that I believe 13 or 14 Republicans in the House had voted for it. We began the debate yesterday in the House, thinking it might last by congressional rules for up to 2 or 3 hours, only to discover that the minority leader took it upon himself, I believe, to speak for 8.5 hours. And I will take some satisfaction because I was the last speaker up and I recognized him so that he could take to the microphone. It's called a 1 minute, but the leadership, in terms of the 1 minute, they are pretty much able to go on for as long as they would like. And I will tell you what I thought with some humor, and I pointed it out today at a press conference as well, was that I quoted a great son of Massachusetts, Daniel Webster. And for whatever reason, the minority leader kept going back to Daniel Webster. So if you watch any of the video of it, it's kind of hilarious because the quote from Daniel Webster is over the speaker's rostrum. And it's a beautiful paragraph, splendid in its flow, but it ends by saying, we're measured by what we might do in our time. And last night, and with the infrastructure bill, we did something worthwhile in our time. So I take a lot of satisfaction from what the Ways and Means Committee did. We have written much of this legislation now. Matter of fact, we've written most of this legislation since the CARES Act in spring of 2020. And let me go through some of the provisions, and I'll take some questions from you. The Build Back Better initiative, it's going to create jobs, lower health care costs, and it will support families. One of the most important provisions is one that the Speaker and I pushed very hard for, and that is paid family leave. If there's a lesson that comes from the pandemic, it's there were a lot of women who had to choose between work and child care as schools closed, and they had no choice. They had to choose child care, so they left the workplace. And we think that paid family leave for 1 month would help out, get people back from the sidelines to work as well. The child tax credit, which has proved remarkably popular, that has already cut childhood poverty rates in the country by north of 30%. The ACA premiums will allow people to continue with their health insurance. In fact, many of the premiums will be lower because of what we're offering. The negotiated drug price, now where insulin will be allocated based on about nothing more than $35 a month, that's a huge, huge success. And we also expanded ACA coverage. So we believe that these provisions that took place this week will create up to 2 million jobs. We reauthorized trade assistance programs, which I hope our community colleges are well positioned for, to move people after a job loss has occurred back to gainful employment very quickly. We devote a considerable amount of money for Medicare coverage and protect seniors and people living with disabilities. We also invest in the enhanced premium subsidies, as I noted, and that's ACA support for unemployed individuals. The revenue package, as you noted, which came close to aligning itself with what is known as the Joint Committee on Tax Score and the Congressional Budget Office tax score. We think that those alignments mean that this is paid for. And I thought that the tone of the debate on our side, anyway, was pretty cordial. I think that those who criticized it were professional And we can live with that. If it's a principled opposition, I can always live with that. So I thought I've had a chance to participate in a lot of important moments in Congress, and this week would be counted amongst the better moments. When you stop and think of what the federal government did to get people back to work and get them to stay in work, a year ago, 22 million Americans had lost their jobs. And now most of those people have gone back to work. So we simultaneously addressed the issue of supply and demand with subsequent legislation, and the President's rescue package that the Ways and Means Committee authored most of. It was a huge down payment on many of the things that we were going to continue to do. And I hope now, as we begin negotiations with the Senate, that the President will have an opportunity before the end of this year to sign the legislation. It's a really terrific piece of substantive work. Questions?
How do you think this will help out us here in Western Massachusetts? What are some residents around here, what are they most excited for?
Well, I think that I'll speak to the two parts of it, the human infrastructure and then the physical infrastructure. I think on the child credit and paid family leave, I think those are two big issues. Those are middle-class benefits, by the way. So in expanding the earned income tax credit, we reward work. If you're willing to go to work, you ought to have these opportunities for some safety net value. And in addition, I think that what I talked about retraining for people, our community colleges, I think those are issues that come to mind. But this is pretty encompassing. So those alone will give some validation to the overall achievement. And on the physical infrastructure side, this allows me to once again make the argument for rail transportation between Boston, Worcester, and Springfield. If this is ever going to happen, this is the time to do it. If you would recall, in the infrastructure package, there is $66 billion for Amtrak. And the most important and efficient parts of Amtrak are on the Northeast Corridor. So we intend, based on conversations staff and I have had with the head of Amtrak, he's going to visit with us. And I think that I continue as recently as last Friday in Boston to lobby Governor Baker assertively. We've got a good relationship. And I anticipate if this is ever going to happen, this is now. But I am going to say this, that I intend to make sure that we don't experience what happened with the Big Dig in Western and Central and Cape Cod regions of the country and the Southeast Coast, where cost overruns time and again made sure that the Big Dig took a lot of money that we think would have been better allocated in terms of geography across the state.
There was some discussion over the mechanics of the Big Dig leave. How is that end up working its way through our bill? Is it the insurance or is it?
It's a combination.
It's a combination.
Yeah.
Can you talk us kind of through that?
Well, I mean, it was a deliberation because there are a lot of companies in America who have already embraced paid family leave. And we're suggesting here that we want to augment those who embrace that behavior. So it was one of those interesting questions that arise from time to time when you will have business interest aligned with, I think, government incentives. It's a good piece of work.
And what happens now in the Senate? How much negotiation still have to be?
Well, the Senate, because of the peculiarity of what is known as reconciliation, they don't have a lot of room. And the legislation, if I use a technical term for a moment, was scrubbed according to the Byrd Rule. So that further constrains the Senate as to what they can do. And I anticipate now that the Senate will look at some of the priorities we've set aside. I do not anticipate big changes. They certainly will try to assert their priorities and preferences, but I don't think that it will be very different from what we did in the House last night.
How long before the child care goes into
The what?
How long before the child care and begin?
Well, you mean on the child credit? That's the child credit we just stay with. That started with the President's rescue package, and this guarantees that there will be at least another year of it. And we made it, I'm glad you raised that. It's now refundable. So you no longer are going to have to do tax preparation.
Okay.
We're going to have the IRS has your tax information. So for those of you who I'm talking to, you might already be benefiting from this. Yeah, but that refundability is a big deal. That's going to stay too, refundability.
For at least another year. For at least another year.
At least remember, we haven't finished this year yet, so there'll be another payment, then we go in for another year beyond that. And that was to meet budget scores.
So some question as to what this is the deficit.
Yeah.
Kind of walk us through.
Sure. So the important ingredient here is to remember that we estimate that by investing $80 billion at the Internal Revenue Service, which has now been cut over 20 years by 30%. There are just 30% fewer auditors reviewing tax forms.
80 million within, Scott.
Pardon?
80 million within.
80 billion, and we expect that will return 400 billion over 10 years, at least. So the IRS Commissioner Reddick, a Republican who was appointed by the former president, he has said that there could be up to $1 trillion over 10 years of uncollected revenue. This will allow the IRS to invest in software, to do modeling, where a lot of tax work takes place for sophisticated forms. It will also allow for auditors to be upgraded. We're going to hire more tax attorneys at the IRS, and I think the $400 billion that we estimate is entirely accurate. The other part of this is just which I think is always a very good footnote for people to understand. For people who are paid in wages, like just all of us, the compliance rate in our tax system is north of 95%. That's a pretty impressive statistic. That means 95% of the American people pay their taxes on time, wage earners. However, where the slippages occurred is for those who are paid in stock, capital gains, and dividends. So your chances of being audited if you claim the earned income tax credit for people at the lower end of the economic spectrum are better than your chances of being audited for people at the top of the economic ladder. So that's a big deal. I also am very pleased that the 15% international rate, which I have pushed for, that was well met by 146 member countries in OECD, and now the sequencing begins. So I spent time talking to Prime Minister Trudeau about that yesterday. I think it was it yesterday or the day before? So many of these things this week, and congratulated him because Canada, along with the United States and 144 other nations, they have subscribed to the idea of harmonization for international tax rates. That's a big deal. And I'm just going to say something else. That the people that are saying it can't work are the people that don't want it to work. We address the issue of treaty shopping, meaning we want the money reported where it's earned as opposed to being transferred to a low-tax jurisdiction and reported there. Great. Well, I probably will talk to you before Thanksgiving, but if not, have a great Thanksgiving.